I like to do a little review each time before we start a session, just to bring us back up to speed. And in the very beginning, we're talking about problems and the purpose of problems, that this world isn't out of control, but God is using everything around us to push us into His presence. And in His presence, we'll find perfect peace. I will keep him in perfect peace whose mind is on me. If you don't have peace, don't sweep cobwebs, go for the spider. How come I don't have peace? It's because my mind isn't on Him. A divided man is unstable in all of his ways. When you're feeling unstable or you're seeing someone who is unstable, it's a clue right away that they're divided. And what are they divided over? Well, we like to think that what we're divided over is our situation and our circumstance, that we're divided because of our sin or because of our failure. But you'll find that the real root and the foundation of division is always in this one thing, that in my situation and where I'm at today, I can't see God anymore. That I've lost my focus and all I see is the situation. And as soon as that happens, there's a ripple effect and I become a very, very unstable person. And so it's important that as I look around and I look at my world, that every day I look at it afresh and I see that God's in the midst of the thing. I remember one time when I came home from out of the country, and Noah, since he's been a little boy, if he hears that there's any trouble in the neighborhood or anyone's having any financial trouble, he would always get all his money together and put it in an envelope, and he'd take it down and put it in these people's mailboxes. And he was always in touch with what was happening in the burbs. He knew what was going on there. And then if one of his friends said that his parents were getting a divorce, Noah would be down and he would ask me if he could buy one of my books. And of course he was always paying big money. I mean, a nickel, a dime, a quarter, something like that. Or maybe we could trade out. And I said, well, you don't have to buy the book. You can just have the book. No, I want to pay for the book. I want to pay for the book if I'm giving it to him. So he'd pay me for these books and he'd take them up and down the neighborhood and give them to people that were having problems. And he's never quit doing that. He's still doing that. And so I got home from a trip, and he said, I got home on Friday, and he told me Saturday he had a counseling session organized for me. And I said, mate, I don't want to do a counseling session. I just got home. I mean, I've been on the road. I got jet lag and all that. I've got a bunch of stuff to do in the morning. I want to go over to home base. I said, I don't want to do any counseling. And he said, well, I already told him that you'd be there. And I said, well, what time is this? He said, 12 o'clock. And I said, well, amen, I'll go there, but I don't want to go, and I'll go over to home base first. So I got up in the morning and I headed out to home base. And as I'm heading out to home base, a guy cuts in front of me and flips me off. And I thought, well, okay, it's somebody's moved here from California. That's just how it goes. And I went on and went a little bit farther. And pretty soon another guy cuts in front of me and flips me off. And I thought, what am I doing? Do I have a bumper sticker that says flip me off? I like that bumper sticker that says Jesus may love you, but everyone else thinks you're a jerk. Well, I'm going along and I'm thinking, what do I have in my bumper? I mean, what are people doing to me? So I get into home base. I'm in a hurry. I got to get this honey-do list done before I get to this session I don't want to go to at 12 o'clock. And I go to the front, and just as I'm pulling into the parking place, and you've seen people do this, I'm getting ready to pull in, and another person comes here and pulls in, and then they pull one more forward so they're facing out when they go. And the guy blocks me. So then I go around this way, and someone else takes that spot. So now I'm on the back 80 somewhere, trying to get back into home base. And I'm just sitting in the car, flip me and fry the other side. Nothing's going right. And I'm really upset. And then all of a sudden, the Lord just reminded me of those trash cans that you see in the hospital, that you hit with your foot and the door comes up. I permitted all this because you've started out the day without your focus on me, but your focus on yourself. It's all about what you didn't want to do. And you've closed the door to Christ's life. And so I've just brought these people along to pound on that little foot pedal until you open the door. And I just stopped there and I said, do you know what, Lord? Even driving to home base isn't a job for humanity. It's a job for divinity. So you come and be the divine. I can't even drive. I can't even get here. I can't walk in the Spirit. I can't do any of this in the power of soul. And I got out of there and the door was open. I was happy as Larry. I went in and I got my stuff, went back down to my office. The thing that Noah forgot to tell me is that this couple were both Mormons. And the Lord broke through, and both of them that afternoon gave their lives to Christ. See, I was becoming unstable at my foundation because I couldn't see God in the situation. And if we see God, we never surrender our peace to a situation. And so what we're saying is that we always look and we see Him. And God is accomplishing His goal every day in this fallen world. But His goal isn't comfort for us. His goal is maturity. His goal isn't that I act like Jesus. His goal is exactly Jesus. Well, hang on, Mike, because Paul says that imitate me because I am imitating Jesus. Well, I agree with that. He was imitating Jesus. But again, we stand and fall on our definitions. What was He imitating about Jesus? Was He imitating all the works of Jesus? Or was Paul actually imitating the very heart and the spirit of Jesus, which is going through the day not saying I can, but saying that I can't? He was imitating the divine humility of Christ. He was imitating that apart from Him, He could do nothing at all. And of course, that kind of imitation we believe in. Now, the obstacle that we have again is this self-life. And God has done all of this for a purpose. And we begin to look at that purpose. I want to go back over just some definitions with you so we're not confused. You have the Adam life. And the Adam life is this inner life that chose independence from God and fell away from God. And so we're born with an outer life. We said that takes its shape in the womb of our mother. But we also have an inner life, and that inner life looks like Adam's life. And that life in the garden chose independence from God. So I have an Adam life in me, but I also am a human being. Now, God didn't create a human being. A human being is a result. God created man, and what man was a being in the very image of God. But when the Adam life within this being made in the image of God chose against God, man stopped being a man and he became a human being. And a human being is this creation that is no longer under God's rule, and the image of God is totally distorted in him, and he doesn't live from God, but he actually lives from this distorted image, and out of his mind and his will and his emotions, he's a soul being. Adam the man was to be ruled over and influenced by the Spirit of God. The human being doesn't need God. It takes the things that are in the image of God that have been distorted and tries to live a life like God. Then man also has a body which we would call the flesh. And this body has its own desires. Now, when these three things work together, the Adam life that has cut itself off from God, my soul power, my humanity, we can call it, where I live out of my mind, my will, and my emotions, and I organize the world and play God, and then I live in a body of flesh that has its own desires, we're going to produce and express the deeds of the flesh. And those deeds of the flesh may look good or they may look bad, but it doesn't matter how they look. They're still the deeds of the flesh that come about from Adam life, the humanness, my humanity, my body, all working together to sort out the world in whatever way I do it. It'll produce the deeds of the flesh. Now, to break this up, we need to take a few of these things out of here, and we can break up the equation. So what we started with is we said that you have an outer life and an inner life. You're born dead to God in the Spirit. You don't know who you are. You're insane. And you ask other people. And you're always self-centered, looking to get your needs met. That's part of what it is when you're distorted an image of God. You want to play God and you want other people to go ahead and worship you. And so what we said you do is that you look to others You want them to meet your needs. If they meet them, you develop a positive image. If they don't meet them, you develop a negative image. And then you begin to change or maintain one of these. So you're going to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and you'll look for the good things that you can do to change or maintain your image. When you can't do those things, you're going to get angry. You're going to go into rebellion. And then you'll do the bad deeds of the flesh. And when you do those bad deeds, those bad expressions, it makes you feel even worse, and you begin to spiral down into this tight little spiral until finally you reach a place of depression. Now, in the midst of all of this was God working and using all of those things. You know, I wouldn't change a single situation in my life because they were the exact situations that I needed to come to the very end of myself where I'll look up instead of looking within. So I'm not upset over any of those things. And that's why we can always bless those that have cursed us, because God has used the person that's cursed you in your life in a positive, and maybe in their cursing there's going to be a lot of judgment that comes upon them. So they're going to be judged, and yet I'm the one that got blessed out of their bad behavior. So I'm not really angry at them. I can bless those that curse me. So now we've spiraled down, and what do? And God's solution is this. I'm not going to fix up your Adam life. I'm not here to patch it up. I don't want to bring the outer man in line or the inner man in line. Instead, what I want to do is I'm going to kill the old life, and it's going to be crucified with me. So he gets rid of the Adam life. And as soon as he gets rid of the Adam life, it's going to break up this equation here. So there can't be the expression of the deeds of the flesh on the level that there was before. We can go back to our one example when we said that here we have the donkey and here we have the horse, and put them together in 11 months you have the mule. The mule's the result being the mule can't reproduce, it's got to recruit. You can kill all the mules and it won't bother the mule at all because it can keep recruiting. But if you go to the source of the thing and you kill either the horses or the donkeys, then there's not going to be as many mules. And again, you have the outer life and the inner life, the Adam life. Those choose against God. They produce the deeds of the flesh, sin. If I knock this out and put Christ in here, sin will naturally begin to decrease. And so I have Christ's life in me, and sin will begin to decrease. But the question that we ended with last night is, if He's my life, why am I still experiencing some of these problems? And there's several reasons for that. The first thing is, you're trusting the old man and still carrying the old man around when he's dead. So the Adam life and the old man are the same thing. I carry it around every day, trusting it, looking to it, hoping that it'll do something for me. We use the example of praying to the doll, but the doll is dead. It's not going to help us any. And at some point, I get tired of having my focus on the old Adam life and the development of it and what took place in it. We've examined our navels long enough, and we're ready to move on. It's just boring. And yet today, there's 1,001 counseling programs that just keep your eyes fixed on the thing that needs to be dead. And if it is dead, why continue there? Why keep looking at it? And so the number one reason is that I refuse to agree with God that this thing is dead and bury it. The next thing we talked about is that even though it's dead and gone, you still have the baggage of it right up here in your mind. You still remember your hurts, you still remember your image, you still remember what you did to change it. Now, when Christ is my focus, and you've all experienced this, and that's a wonderful thing about this teaching, you're never telling somebody something they haven't experienced. You're never saying, I have something that you don't have. When Christ is your life and He's flowing through you, He locks the baggage up, the residue of the old Adam life, and it doesn't bother you one little bit. But when He isn't flowing through you, the door closes, and then when it closes, all of this stirs back up again, and you're more miserable than you were as an unbeliever. Because with Adam life in you, this agreed, it was Adam life. But now with Christ's life in me, I have a real conflict as I continue to live that way. And again, it's a very, very simple solution. If you just go take 5 minutes with Jesus, if you just had 10 minutes with Him, If you just stop for a minute and He's your focus, and you acknowledge that you're abiding, and you admit that you've been crucified with Christ, all of a sudden there's not a problem. Now the next thing that happens is that when this door closes, and we say that what opens the door is humility, and divine humility is simply saying, I can't. And what closes the door is when I come to a place of pride, and pride simply says, I can. And that's what opens and closes the door. So I meet a situation, and I say in this situation of driving to home base and of going to do counseling or even talking to my wife, whatever I'm doing, I meet a situation, and as soon as I say I can, I've closed the door to Christ's life. Now when that happens, not only does the old stuff stir up, but my humanity takes over, and I begin to fix the situation in my humanism, which is my mind and my will and my emotions that were made in the image of God and yet distorted. So how good is the plan going to be? Now, if you want to see the effectiveness of humanism, just watch the news tonight. And all these plans that we hear, and sometimes it's just laughable when you hear the State of the Union and everything that's going to happen and what's going to take place and what we're going to change and what kind of America we're going to have and blah, 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 blah. And do you know what? You could check that off in the next year. None of it's happened. Not any of it. But again, if humanism can succeed at 5%, they're going to put a magnifying glass under that and make sure that you see it. I don't know if I was sharing with you out of the British Medical Journal I was reading a few years ago. This was in maybe 98, 99. But what the fellow had done, might have been 99, in the British Medical Journal, he'd gone back to 1989 and he'd looked at all of the scientific breakthroughs that we'd had in 1989. And all of them that were absolute breakthroughs in science. And he was looking at them from 1999, looking back at 1989, and what he discovered is that 95% of them were proven now in 1999 to be false. Now isn't that amazing? That it was all false research, it was non-verifiable. And what he found out is that because these people wanted to do the spectacular and because they wanted grants and because of the competition and all of those kind of things, they'd set in their mind where they wanted things to go. But my, if you read the Medical Journal in '89, you would think man had arrived at being God. And then what he did is he projected ahead and said that things aren't going to get any better. See, we again take this 5% that humanity is able to do, put it under a magnifying glass, and act like it's 100%. You're not going to do any better than anyone else living out of your humanity, which is your mind and your will and your emotions that were created in the image of God but now distorted. So when I say I can, I move into my humanity to fix my situation. And my plan is not a good plan at all. Not only do I move into that then, I also move into the power of my body to fix the situation, the power of my flesh. And what's going to happen then is I will in the end up expressing flesh in some way. I'll end up expressing the way an animal expresses. The other thing about flesh is this. It can continue to increase then the expressions of flesh after I've become a Christian. Because all I have to do is close the door to His life, start to live out of this baggage, live out of my humanity, let my body rule over me, and I'm going to start expressing new deeds of the flesh. And so one of the things we mentioned the other night that's a new deed of the flesh that you wouldn't have seen 20 years ago at all to the level it is pornography. I mean, there aren't a lot. I don't know how I would stand up at 14, 15 years old when you go onto the internet and you're going to get your email and this picture pops up. I imagine I might sit there and go, this is terrible. I shouldn't be watching this. I wonder what's on the next page. That'd be the normal response of the body and the flesh of man. And so what happens is that flesh is added to. Well, one of the things we look at as we see our self-life and our flesh life, just label it flesh and put it on the table or on the shelves, and know now that God has another stronghold to keep you near. Because what we're saying is this, that all of these things that make me miserable, the residue, my humanity, my body, and the expressions of my flesh are actually God's stronghold in me to keep me near to Him moment by moment because He loves me that much. That He knew exactly what He was doing when He created Adam, the man, in this model. He knew what the end result would be. Again, I would rather be tempted and go to Jesus than never be tempted. I'd rather be miserable and driven to Jesus than never be miserable. I'd rather have a failure and go to Jesus than never have the failure. Because when I go to Him and His life flows out of me, there's nothing like that experience. And so these things I don't see as a negative, and I don't hate myself and I don't hate my body, but what I do is I want to take up the cross and deny myself. Now I'm starting to get an idea of what myself is. Every day I need to deny the desire to trust the old thing, focus on it, and want to change the Adam life, the old man. Every day I have to deny wanting to live out of my humanness, my human being, my old nature. I have to deny it. And every day I have to deny some of these things that pop up in my body. And so that's something I do daily. It's not a one-time fix. And the reason He's done that is to keep me near to Him moment by moment. And as I'm near to Him, I'm very, very happy. So you look at it this way. Point A is I've got Christ's life in me. What's true of Christ is true of me. His holiness is my holiness. His victory is my victory. His nearness is my nearness. His acceptance is my acceptance. Everything that's true about Him is true about me. It can't be any other way. Now Christ flows exactly through me. The enemy doesn't like that. Jesus has been multiplied on the earth. So what he does is he tries to bring messages today that are similar to past messages to push a button and close the door to Christ's life. And as soon as that door is closed, the old identity feelings that are resident in my mind, my worthlessness, my unacceptableness, my failure, or maybe all my self-righteousness are stirred up. Then the old attempts of proving come back in. They surface. And then the pressures build, and I go back into the old idols that we talked about, the things that we trust other than God. Then I begin to feel and perform and cope exactly as an unbeliever. I know that I'm going to heaven, but I feel like I'm living in a daily hell. I start to live out of the soul power, my humanity. I start to live out of my body power there, which is flesh. I start to express flesh, and I become a miserable person. And the solution to that is to just stop, acknowledge that I'm abiding. And how do I abide? I admit that I am. It's a faith issue, that you're my life. And just 3 minutes with Him is all you need, just 1 minute with Him, to let this door open and His life flow. And He knows that Mike is happiest when Christ's life is flowing through him. He knows that's what makes me the happiest. So He leaves this stuff in me, so I'll be driven back to Him moment by moment by moment. Now, when you look at man, and we might say that the enemy is the flesh, and the enemy is Adam life, and the enemy is the old nature, but we have a lot of enemies, don't we? I mean, not only is this Adam life an enemy to what I want to be and what God intends me to become, which is a bride, but there's also, as we said, the mind and the will and the emotions, my humanity living out of my soul power. Then there's the desires of the body. And then out here's the unholy trinity of sin and Satan and the world. There's natural desire that bothers me. Sickness isn't any fun in the body. I don't like it when my emotions run wild. I certainly have a problem with people, if they would change. And then there's circumstance outside of me There's events outside of me. There's the world outside of me. How many enemies does man have? I think we could go on and on and on. And the beautiful thing about Christ is that he came, the life that wins, and this life that wins conquered each and every one of those things. And all he had to do was conquer it at one point, and the whole thing was destroyed. Because it operates on absolutes. Now, when you're doing a chemistry experiment, what you're doing is you're looking at absolutes. And if there's a deviation, you have to throw the experiment out because it's not working. You got to find the absolute. And here is the absolute in all of our enemies. These enemies always conquered the human being. The humanity of man, the Adam life, it always conquered them. But if someone comes and conquers it at one point, the divine deviation will conquer the whole thing. So Christ was tempted in all things. How many things was he tempted in then? All things. So was he tempted in homosexuality? Was he or wasn't he? And all it takes is one man to say no to homosexuality, and the power of homosexuality over humanity is now broken. All it takes is one man to tell the truth, and the power of a lie is broken. All it takes is one man to say no to bitterness, and the power of bitterness is broken. It only takes one man to say no to the power of anger, and all anger is broken. And I don't know how long it takes to be tempted in all things, but I think it's a little over 33 years. And you get tempted in all things, then the power of all things are broken. And when it comes to the day that he's crucified, then there's a life in him that has conquered every possible enemy that we could ever have. How do you get that life out of him and get it into you? Because I'd like to have that life. And the secret's in Genesis 9:4 when it says this, the life is in the blood. That when he was crucified and his blood came out, in that blood there was a life that had conquered all things. And so now the word blood, his blood, is referred to 93 times in the New Testament. And we're very narrow in the way we look at his blood, because we look at his blood as the shedding of his blood for the forgiveness of sins, which is true, and we've already talked about the sacrifice and how that works and why there had to be a sacrifice. But this blood possesses a life now that has conquered all things. And I'd like to get that life out of him and into me, and it comes in the blood. Now here's the beautiful thing then about communion. When we take communion, the first thing that we take is the loaf. And what do we say the loaf is? It's his body. And then we've already talked about the fact that the day that he was crucified, since I was put in him, who else was crucified? Mike was. And so communion is not this thing where we're serious and you need to discern your sins, brother, and are you feeling guilty enough before you do this? But communion is a celebration where I take this loaf, this bread, and I know that when he was crucified, I was crucified. And when I put that in my mouth and I crushed that, this old life that plagued me, the one that I hated so much, the one that I've tried to change through good or through bad, is actually crushed and destroyed with him. And I love communion because it's a big celebration. I like it, and sometimes I'll sit there and just go, because I'm glad that the old life is crucified and put to death and destroyed. And communion isn't what the Catholics say, transubstantiation, and it's not what the evangelicals say, a symbol. It is actually a spiritual reality that is connecting me to heaven right now. And the proof that it's a spiritual reality is this: people who took it wrongly were dying. Now that doesn't happen out of something that's a symbol. That comes out of a spiritual reality that I'm celebrating facts here, spiritual facts that my old life has been crucified with Christ. And now what's the next thing I take? The cup. And what is in the cup? The blood. But what's in the blood? The life that's conquered everything. And as I take that into my being, the blood flows through my whole being. Do you know that if you cut the blood off to your hand begins to go numb, and the reason it's going numb is it's poisoned. You've got enough poison in your body right now to kill 10 people. But because the blood flows and filters out the poison, you're able to live a normal life even though you're poisoned here today. When I say to Jesus, let the blood flow, it's flowing in a poisoned mic. I know it's poisoned. My mind, my will, my emotions are poisoned. My humanity is poisoned. My body is poisoned. My fleshly desires are poisoned. The expression of the flesh is all poison to me. But as the blood flows, He cleanses every bit of that. And I live a normal life of His life flowing through me. The blood is far, far better than the blood of the Old Testament. The blood of the Old Testament simply covered up things. And you can put a rag over it so you don't see your hand. But when this blood comes, you can move the rag and there's no sin there anymore. It's a much, much better thing. And so in communion, I'm celebrating the fact that I've been crucified with Christ and that a new life is flowing through me that has conquered all the enemies that I have. Okay, let's take another break. Come